Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Well, hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your relationship guy, John Johnson, and on this episode, I am going to talk about living arrangements. I was in a conversation with a couple of the other respected experts here in the building, and we got to talking about what it was like being in college and having interesting living arrangements, and about setting up boundaries to make your living arrangement a little better. And I find the conversation is fascinating. It's when you have a relationship and it's yourself and the person, there's a romantic relationship going on. Both of you are kind of in it for the same reason. You both are definitely there to support each other. And when you have a situation which is a little bit different, let's say you have a roommate thing where both of you are definitely interested in contributing to the household itself, but you have separate interests. And sometimes those separate interests could be something as simple as one person likes soccer, another person likes needlepoint, and I'm going to address this from the standpoint, it doesn't matter the gender, whether you're male or female, but it's just the idea that, when those two aren't a couple, let's say you're just friends. And then you introduce another person in the relationship per se. And if that other person is a romantic interest to one of the roommates, then it changes the dynamic. The friendship between the two original roommates obviously gets diluted because now you have another person that's been introduced, and that person is special to just one of the roommates. You kind of get the picture here? And it's interesting because one would ask, okay, what changes? Well, obviously there's a primary relationship for somebody in this. What was a duo, it's now becomes a duo plus one, but that plus one is for one particular. And how do you handle the changes? For example, when you start out with the friendship, the two roommates originally, they hang out together. They go for beers or they might watch something on TV together, go out to a sports bar, maybe even take trips together, plan things, and they're best of buds. But when that changes, and sometimes these things change, it just happens. When it becomes a romantic thing with one of the partners because they've gotten somebody else, then how does the person that's feeling left out, how are they going to be? I'm trying to do this without using names because it would just kind of make it even a little more convoluted. But I'm just trying to create the scenario, create the picture that you get, that this thing it kind of starts out, plain and simple between two people, and then it starts to get muddled and get muddy. And when it starts to go that direction, what do you do? How do you not become jealous if you're the person that's left out? How do you not be jealous about this? Because obviously, you want to be happy for your roommate because they have a relationship and somebody that they care about and want to spend their life with, but you're kind of left out of the picture. And there's that part. What do you do? Well, part of the recognition is that we all have separate lives. You had that before you came into the situation, and clearly you always look at, okay, how dependent can I ever become on another person? And now something like that can really dig down into some childhood issues, because if you have abandonment issues, the thought of, your best friend, your buddy, hooking up with somebody else, can kind of leave you, really bruised. And again, you want the best for them, but you also want the best for yourself too. all have an understanding that nobody can take care of you better than yourself. And if you don't have that understanding, grasp it. Nobody can take care of you better than you. You have to learn to look out for your own interests, and obviously do that with a sense of responsibility. It's not about running all over the top of someone, but in the case like this, if being a third wheel, let me borrow that for a minute. If being the third wheel feels awkward, well, then you need to do something about that yourself and find other things to do. But when it comes to the roommates, what do you do when you have a conflict? And I'm talking about this now, so those of you that haven't been in a situation, it's something to think about. You think about how do you create some rules for dealing with conflict, because it's not just about lovers who have to deal with the conflict. Friends have to deal with conflict too. I mean, nobody's going to be happy 100% of the time. But the thing with lovers is because they have a tendency to spend a great deal of quality time together, there's a lot at risk when there is conflict. I mean, in terms of being able to have that time. And when you're just friends, and not to dilute that, not to say that it's not important, but when you're friends, you tend to at least can go to a neutral corner, and you can be in your own space for a few days and do your own thing, probably let off some steam, blow it off, get back together with your buddy, and probably not even mention it. It just kind of goes by. But when conflict happens in a primary relationship, you tend to have to handle that a little bit. It's more important to handle it right now. So, but going back to the roommate situation, well, you want to think about how you handle conflict, and you want to set some rules. You want to at least establish a method for being able to say, okay, when we have an issue, we're going to address it such and such a fashion. Say, I'm going to leave you a note on the refrigerator. Hey, can I get some time to talk with you? And you have to agree to make something like that a priority, okay? So that we don't have these things that just play on and on and on and on and on and don't not get resolved. And this is a good lesson for life. You want to create in your relationships a way of dealing with conflict. And you want to think about that ahead of time, not wait till conflict happens, because when you wait till then, it could be a trust issue. It could be somebody might think that you're aiming to take advantage of the situation or take advantage of them by trying to establish some rules, because it may not sound as though it's very fair. Because if for some reason you don't want to be in that conversation in terms of resolving the issue, it might be because you don't have any trust. But if you establish something ahead of time, it makes it a lot easier to come to the table and say, hey, we have an issue. Let's talk about it. Let's come to a resolution. And I think that's another thing. Be honest in your commitment about wanting to have a resolution. Some people don't necessarily understand that. Their perception is they just want to keep throwing fuel on the fire and not really resolve it. And for you, if you're a participant in that kind of discussion, know that the other person is not really trying to resolve it, and you might as well just disconnect. Disconnect from that conversation and say, hey, you know what? This is not going anywhere, and we've established some rules. Let's try to resolve it and not just keep adding fuel to the fire. It may require a referee. And I talk a great deal about counseling, and that's what counselors, therapists do, is they often they referee situations between couples. And it doesn't have to always be man and woman couple. It doesn't have to be an intimate relationship that needs therapy. It could be friends, and you could be amazed at what you can learn in your friendships about how to be in relationships. Because with that, sometimes it's a lot less of the when the romantic part isn't in it. Sometimes you can be pretty open to really listening to criticism, because at least you may not feel so beat up on. You can hear, the other person can say what they need to say. When you're in a romantic relationship, sometimes you're worried about the backlash. Sometimes you're worried if you say too much. Even though we are in a therapy session, you might worry that, okay, there could be repercussions if I say this, even though we're supposed to be honest. Well, friendships sometimes can survive those, because then you figure, hey, we're still going to go to our neutral corner. I have my place, they have their place, and we can get to the end of this. So establishing rules, agree to make it a priority, and it's like you're having a little contract. Write that out. because by doing so, I think it brings to mind the idea that, hey, this is something that is important. And by establishing that it is important, they will take it seriously. You get to take it seriously, and you put into play an opportunity to resolve things. And when and if you ever need to go to your agreement, then feel confident that you're gonna rely on the method of resolving the conflict. You're gonna have a good outcome, and things are gonna be better. Because when you're dealing with the unknown, that's where most of our fears come from. When you're dealing with the unknown. So think about it. Anyhow, I'm going to close that. I'm going to take a little break, and I'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this segment I'm going to talk about, we are in a political season. We're just a few short weeks up until we have the general election of 2016. And one of the things that has come up this year is we have the first woman who has been nominated for president in the Democratic Convention, and you have on the Republican side a gentleman, Mr. Donald Trump, who has defied a lot of conventions and has been able to get nominated for as the lead on the Republican ticket. And you have a couple of independents who are also vying for interest and attention to this year's election. And quite often the people of the two leading parties are often there to raise awareness to other causes. And in this particular year, 2016, Mr. Bernie Sanders, who was running running for the Democratic nomination, has been very good at raising some interest. Now, I say all of that because I'm leading up to a situation that happens for people, friendships, when this year has been very polarizing when it comes to politics. And depending upon whatever your position is, this isn't something about my position against your position, whether mine's better, yours isn't. It is all about when your friends have points of view and they're differing points of view. How do you handle that? How do you absorb that? Do you take it personal? Is it an affront if you're a Trump supporter and somebody's saying something about Hillary and they're bashing Hillary, and then vice versa? Well, we've found that this particular year, again, there's a lot of polarizing conversations out there. And how do you stay friends through something like that? Because this isn't the first time in life that there's been differences. Because there's things beyond politics in life. There's religion. There's family dynamics. There are all kinds of things. And what I'm going to talk about, draws from those kinds of experiences and how you handle conflict. If you're a supporter of either of the two primary parties, the Democrats or Republicans, and your friends have a differing view, recognize that their positions, their points of view have nothing to do with you personally. So even if you get into a conversation about it, and I know this can be very, very testy for people, because I know people who have sort of divorced relatives because of their politics. And when I say divorce, I mean it's the idea that they don't want to be friends anymore because the political views seem to be pretty out there. And I can understand that there are some things that'd be pretty upsetting to talk about. But I'm saying, as when it comes to the people part of it, the individual, the human, the person that you love, always remember, start there. We are talking about, this is somebody who you care about, and whatever their position is on politics, remember, it's about the politics. It's not about you. And sometimes people can articulate their points of view very well. And there are others that they probably don't do as good a job of articulating their view, but they are very passionate about it. And when it comes to discussing these kinds of things, sometimes the conversations aren't so friendly. So it's not necessarily about the individual. It's about the way it's being discussed. And oftentimes that is what sets people apart. And if you are in the experience of something like that, realize that if it were a different subject, you probably could have a very nice, friendly conversation. But it's something about people being very passionate about something, and sometimes it seems like they are becoming insulting. So I'm saying, as a person, as a listener, if you're in that experience, remember, it's not about taking it personal. Somebody's just passionate about their point of view. You can accept their point of view, and you can have your own. And there's the old saying, we can just agree to disagree. And I find that gets through those kinds of moments a lot better than deciding you're going to end a relationship or friendship because they have a differing political point of view. And, there are times in life where these things could be life-altering. They could be talking about something that's, very, very serious. It could be talking about something that can affect somebody's life, their health, something. And while that may be the case, in some situations, most situations in life aren't that dire. And I'm just saying, as a spokesperson on a podcast who's sharing about how to get along with your friends, your relatives, your significant others, your spouse, think about where that conversation is coming from on their part, and that helps you get past it. Like I say, don't take it personal. Because I, as a human being, have definitely heard things that have upset me and about other people's points of view. And it took a lot of thinking about how I say things that made me really reconsider, is it worth losing a friendship? And I tend to think not. I tend to know that there are certain subjects I probably wouldn't talk about because, you have certain friends who are I consider experts on certain things, and I would love to talk to them about stuff because I like to be enlightened. And then there are people that's not something that they really know a lot about. So I don't tend to introduce topics that they wouldn't be interested in. I've got my baseball friends and I've got my politics friends, and that's okay. Remember, don't take it personal.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hey, have you ever had a situation where there's somebody that you're attracted to, but you just have a lot of anxiety about wanting to talk to that person, kind of making your feelings known? And you ever wonder what that's about? Well, one of the things that I can share with you is when the stakes are really high, I think all of our anxiety, our fear of failure steps in. We can remember, maybe not just remembering the image in our head, but we can remember the feeling of approaching someone or something that we wanted and failed at it. I mean, if you can imagine what it's like to have something that you want, like say you want to have a conversation with someone, like you say, here was the attractive person, and you're imagining this dream date, this possibility of your life changing in terms of a relationship. So everything is on the line. You have to engage that person. You have to get them involved. And, I think there's that fear of rejection. So that's underneath it all. But what I want to do is I'm going to give you a little confidence builder here. I'm going to tell you something and this is something as a guy, I've heard this from attractive women. They say a lot of them are very lonely. And women who are listening to this understand that from the guy's perspective, guys are afraid of being rejected. But for the guys that may be listening to this podcast, here's the thing. There are a lot of very attractive women, and a lot of them are very lonely, if because they've heard the same old pickup line, that's very cliche, and it's just tired. And women, they've either talked about it, they've heard about it, read about it, something, and it's just something that just throws them off. And even if the guy is a little awkward, they say they would much rather have him be authentic and be original than to use some old tired pickup line that just really doesn't represent who he is. Because I think what women are always leery of is some guys is just going to show up out of the woodwork and then try to use them. And women have a reason to be cautious. Now, women don't have to be necessarily so needy because they don't have to depend on a guy to take care of them. Although they may love the affection and the attention, they don't necessarily need a guy to take care of them the way they used to. So they don't have to pretend. But, again, I'm saying that to the guys, to the listening audience. So, yeah, when you add that to the mix, yeah, it even raises the stakes more. But being authentic is what's going to get their attention. I'll say it again. Being authentic, that means being yourself, is what's going to get their attention. Because being anyone else, it won't work, because it won't match. Because a person will decide what they like based on what they see and how you behave. And you want to be able to do that, be who you are all the time. Now, it may turn out that who you might be interested in, it may not work out. But trying to do it from the place of being a fraud, by the place of being someone else, not being yourself, isn't going to work either. Because when the real you shows up, it's either going to make it or not. And it's easier being the real you. So if you're a bit klutzy, then, again, be you are, because that could be endearing. Because for the most part, women appreciate a guy that's sincere. Now, to the women who are listening to this podcast, I think hopefully I've not spoken out of turn, because, again, I've talked to women about that. So I'm not just making that up. But what I want to share is, from the guy's point of view, there is, and I'm not saying it's fair, but there is the perception that really attractive women are screwed up in the head, that they want things that they can't have, that they're looking to trade up, and that frustrates a guy. So what a guy is more tempted to do is to pretend to be somebody he's not in order to get you, maybe to bed you, and then figure out if there's some other way that he can keep you long enough to where then you'll become dependent upon him. And I know that sounds twisted and just not nice, but that's what's going on in guys' heads, because I've talked to them. Again, guys think a really attractive women are attractive, but the perception is that they have been told that they're good looking so much of their life that when a guy approaches them, and if he's not as very good looking, that she's not going to want to be with me because I'm not that great looking of a guy. And I think it's really incumbent upon women to communicate what their need is. So this actually may be a bit of a twist on this. The women may have to take the lead in some of these conversations. And I know it's a bit different. I know they want men to be the aggressor, men to be the chaser. They will continue to be that. But it's about changing the perception that really attractive women are just screwed up in the head. And now, I know from some of the women that I've talked to that they've really been through the crapper. They've been with guys who have been jocks. They have been all about getting the sex, getting laid, and not being very mature in how they behave. And it's definitely screwed up a lot of people. But that's also to say that those are individuals that have done things. And to not wash their whole the whole male species because you've had relationships with guys who have been jerks. What we find is that sometimes it's a matter of picking a different kind of guy. Oftentimes people are attracted to the same kind of individual. They keep going to that kind of individual who, if the track record is there, maybe you need to pick a different kind of guy. And I know, again, we should be judging people on their individual characteristics, but you got to learn to ask better questions about individuals and wait for the answer, wait for the response. Because let your life matter. Let the experiences that you've had teach you to ask better questions. And I mean that on both sides of the coin. And guys, don't assume that a woman isn't interested in you because you're not as good looking as somebody else. Again, if you're being sincere, they can look past that, and vice versa. I think it's also to say to guys that when you're attracted, who you want to be attracted to, it's not always about how good looking they are per se. When you think in your head, what are you attracted to? I think you really need to be dealing with the personality types. So I'm trying to make sure that goes for both men and women. It's not just one way. It's not just saying attractive women are screwed up and that guys, you have to be on the lookout. It's guys, don't always assume that women are screwed up. Sometimes it's maybe you're screwed up as a guy and you need to change your thinking about how you approach women. And be sincere, be a gentleman. And I think we all know what that is. If you don't know what it is, Google it. Google gentleman, read up on it, and then figure out what it is that you can do to be responsible, to talk to women in a way that's respectful of who they are. And also it's a reflection on you. And to take care of your personal business too, because here's the thing: any and everybody can be looked up on the internet, and if you have a track record of being irresponsible, boom, it come right up on the computer, because we can see how many places you've lived. If you skip out on your bills, and if you have baby mama drama, you can look up somebody's background and find out if they've got an arrest record, and all kinds of things. So if you're a guy that's got a lot of scratchy history, then maybe that's why women don't want to be around you, because they've actually found you out. They may not even tell you. Really. I've talked to people that have actually done that. They did a background check, and in this day and age, it's cheap insurance. And I encourage people to do that. Do a background check on somebody. And then when you're sitting down having that honest conversation, check it out. Find out if they're answering the questions. Now, as it is with information like that, some of it is, highly accurate. Some of it can be suspect because, as you know, even credit reporting agencies get bad information. So consider the source. But it's very easy to check up on somebody. And if you're doing your checking and things don't add up, they don't check out, again, this is for both sides, men and women, hey, that might be a red flag. And I say use that as good information going forward. Hey, I'm John Johnson, and you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Join me next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies, to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.